Okay, I then wanted to have a chat about Don and Mary's story. Don and Mary are actually Tom's parents. They're 61, they're already retired, and they really never really believed in superannuation because the government changes the rules all the time. They see all the fees coming out of their retail super funds, and particularly over the last few years they've seen it just going backwards with returns. So they've only got a very small superannuation amount of about $50,000 in retail super, and now that they're retired, they're actually, because they hold most of their assets outside of super, they're paying tax in retirement and are really wanting to know, can they do anything now to reduce the amount of tax they pay every year? So this is their situation. These people actually had a business as well. They still own the property that the business was run out of, but it's now being rented to an unrelated third-party tenant. And when they sold their business, they just took the proceeds of the business sale and put it into a term deposit because they're quite conservative and they want to make sure they're protecting their capital. So in retirement now, because all these assets are outside of super and they're all owned in joint names, they've got gross income of about $132,000 a year and paying just under $29,000 a year in tax. So they're netting about $103,000 a year in their retirement, which that's not a bad position to be in. But they've heard that other people are paying much less tax in retirement and they want to see how they can get into that situation. So in this circumstance, if we establish a self-managed super fund, we could then roll their little superannuation of $50,000 over into the self-managed fund, and we could then look at getting that property into super. Now, there's nothing in the legislation that says a contribution has to be done in cash. It can be done with an asset, so you can actually contribute the property in, or you can contribute shares in, okay? And because the super fund is in effect acquiring an asset from you, it's actually prohibited from doing that except if it's business real property, so a property that's used in your or someone else's business, or if it's listed shares. So in this case, to try and keep things simple, we want to get as much of that, we want to get the whole property in one hit. So we're actually going to contribute the $1.2 million property in on the 25th of June this year. Now, you're probably looking at that and thinking, well, if I put in 1.2 million, I've just breached all my cap limits and caused a big tax bill. But when you have a self-managed super fund, you can actually choose when you're going to allocate contributions to members. And you have 28 days from when the contribution hits the bank account to decide which member is going to get that contribution. So in this case, the solicitor does the transfer paperwork to put the whole property in on the 25th of June. But within the super fund, we make a decision to say we're only going to allocate $150,000 each as a non-concessional contribution in June. The rest of the $900,000 on paper is going to sit in a contribution reserve account, which just means we haven't made a decision on who's getting it. It's just sitting in reserve on the books. Once the new financial year ticks over, any time after the 1st of July, but within 28 days, we then would say the other $900,000 is now going to be attributed as a non-concessional contribution, or $450,000 each. So we've stayed within our non-concessional cap limits last year, and we've done the same again this year. So we've got the whole property in there. Now, we can't make any further non-concessional contributions for the next 2 years now because we've used our bring forward provisions. But we have the property in there. And again, all of the rental income is now in that low tax environment. Now, we actually want to try and get the term deposit into super as well, so we have to wait a few years to be able to do that because we can't contribute anything for the next 2 years. But we can get that other $600,000 term deposit in as well. So if we just have a look at this, and this is where it's important that if you're getting to 65, you're really sitting and thinking about how can you time these contributions, because this would have looked a lot different, and I maybe would have chosen the order of contributions a bit differently if they were 62. So in the year they were 61, this year they've put $150,000 each in. Next year they put their $450,000 in, and then nothing for the next 2 years. Then in the last year, assuming that they were both aged 64 or younger on the 1st of July, so they haven't had their birthdays yet, they can then put in up to $450,000 each in that last year. So I've only needed to put $300,000 each, but I've now got all of the term deposit in. So we've actually been able to get $1.8 million into super over the last 4 or 5 year period. And importantly, all of their investment assets are now held in that low tax environment. So at age 65 now, we've got our self-managed super fund owning the $1.2 million property, the $600,000 term deposit, and it's got a small bank account of about $50,000 from the original rollovers. And it's generating $132,000 per annum income, so the same income as before, but it's all tax-free now. So it's completely tax-free in the fund because the fund is paying them a pension. And when they draw that out, it's also tax-free out in their own names. It's coming out as a pension. So we've saved them $29,000 a year from the age of 65. For as long as they live now, they've got that tax saving because it's just coming out of super. And I guess going back to the sole purpose test, which I said was one of the really important tests in super, which says that sole purpose has to be the provision of benefits for members after their retirement. I think that really satisfies the sole purpose test because we're now generating an extra $29,000 a year for them in retirement, for their retirement benefits. And to put that in context, if you have to go into nursing home these days and get high care, the fees are about $30,000 a year per single person. So to have an extra $29,000 could be very important in their retirements. The other fantastic thing is because once you start a pension and the tax rate goes to zero for the super fund, that property can be sold at any time in the future in the super fund and there will be absolutely no capital gains tax because we're in a zero tax vehicle. So again, that's also very important. If you're timing the purchase and sale of your assets correctly, so you're buying an asset while you're in the accumulation phase of super, and then you're not selling it until you're in pension phase, you can potentially do that with no capital gains tax.